auditioned for the FTII, first of all, he was very reluctant. I had to literally push him to apply. And I was a second year student then, and we were supposed to help the partners to the applicants. So Om did his bit. He did a piece from a play called Suno Janme Jai, which was quite brilliant. And then he did a translation of Friends, Romans, Countrymen. And both were quite excellent. There was a gentleman sitting there who I shall not name, but who was not the most popular man in the film, who turned around and said, "Nah, he doesn't have a cinematic face." I was a student at that time, so I had no say in the matter, but I would have gladly hit that gentleman on the head with a chair. But instead of me, Girish Karnad did the needful, because he really lit into this person and said, "What do you mean by cinematic face?" Cinematic face is exactly what Anil was talking about, that was required from the Hatta Katta Punjabis, the Dharmendra school of acting. Om was none of that, and I'm sure all of you will agree that how utterly laughable this statement was, that Om doesn't have a cinematic face. Om's face is like a landscape in itself. And it's very difficult for me to talk about him, and I'm being asked all the time. The immortal question, how do I feel? Journalists always want to know how you feel. They can never come to any conclusion on their own. You have to put it into the most cliched words possible, and only that satisfies them. So I've desisted from talking about how I feel, because my relation with Om was very complex, very deep, it was very long-lasting, and it was full of love, and it was full of a lot of friction as well. But I don't think I need to talk about how much I loved him and how much I miss him. Those things would be felt by anybody who had anything to do with Om ever, or anybody who watched his work. There's just a little anecdote about him that I would also like to share. When we first met, we had just been admitted to the drama school. He had come from Patiala, along with Jaspal, and I had come from Aligarh. And he and Jaspal had been working in the theatre with Harpal Tivana. They had more experience of the theatre than I had. There was no hostel in the drama school those days. We had to fend for ourselves where accommodation was concerned. So I used my dad's influence and got a room in a house in Electric Lane with a friend of his. Om and Jaspal were staying together at Jaspal's uncle's. Jaspal's uncle was a guard at Old Delhi Station. And I imagined that it must be a pretty nice place they're living in too. I'd done a lot of traveling in trains as a child, and a guard is always a rather grand figure. Child, like an engine driver, very glamorous figure. And one day Om said, "Ke aao khana khao hamare saath, main khana banata hu." And I went over, and I was expecting a saronda saag and makke di roti kind of thing, but what I got was anda curry, made by Om, and it was absolutely delicious. And when I got there, I realized it was not a grand house at all. It was two tiny rooms. Both the rooms were about as large as this platform. There were 5 people living there, including Jaspal and Om. And at the end of dinner, I asked Om, "Tu kahan rehta hai yaar? Where do you sleep?" He said, "Aao dikhata hu." He took me outside to a corridor outside the room. The corridor was facing Old Delhi Station. You ever been to Old Delhi Station? You come out of the station and turn left and head towards the Red Fort. That was the road. Where you could smell the stench of Old Delhi Station. You could smell the smoke from the engines. And in this corridor, outside the guards' quarters, I saw a little charpai very neatly covered with a bed cover, a pair of chappals placed very neatly below it, a little bookcase with a couple of scripts and maybe one book, My Life in Art, and a pen and a lungi hanging on the wall and a stove on which the anda curry had been cooked. Kind of stove which had a pump. Makes a god-awful racket, sound like a waterfall when it's alight. Om's journey from that smelly corridor outside Old Delhi station to the kind of success in international cinema that all of us only fantasize about is a testament to man's character and wit. I have to say that he was in a very unhappy space for the last few years of his life. Maybe it's a good thing he's moved on. The last film I did with Om is worth about. I won't mention the movie, but it was a small budget, costly affair. And it was being dubbed. I was called to dub it. And when I walked in, Om was already dubbing his bit. And I walked in and sat down, and he had a sentence or something, and at the end of which he had to say, in response to something that somebody else has said. And he was doing it very half-heartedly. And he said, chalo theek hai, okay. Ho gaya. Chal Naseer tu kar. I said, yaar, tera wo jo hu jo bola tune, wo wasn't good enough. Just do it again, na. Wo out of sync bhi tha, aur dusra, I don't think it had the feeling that it was needed. Om says, यार इतने पैसे में ऐसा ही हूँ निकले. So the director, not to be outdone, says, "Oh, ऐसा करो, हूँ बोलो ही नहीं, थोड़ा पैसा वापस कर दो."